The Baltimore Ravens made a move for Panthers wide receiver Diontae Johnson on Tuesday. What does it mean for the Ravens? What does he bring to Baltimore? And does it increase their standing in the AFC at all? All that and more coming up on a midweek edition of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens. We are your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, and I'm your host, Kevin Ostraker of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here today and making Locked On Ravens both a part of your day and your first listen each and every single day. Are free and available for you on all podcasting platforms. So that includes in video form on YouTube, where you can like and subscribe to the channel, also in audio form, where you can follow along and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Again, 5 days a week plus more of daily Ravens coverage here. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Big day for the Ravens on Tuesday as they made a trade. They acquired Diontae Johnson from the Carolina Panthers. Here to talk about that with me and a lot more Ravens is Ken McKusick of the Film Study Podcast. Ken, appreciate you being here with me today. And I know it was a tough game for the Ravens on Sunday. They fall to 5-3, but I think, to me, a lot of excitement in the air with Diontae Johnson's trade, but it's not a defensive player. So certainly some questions about what could be next for the Ravens.
Yeah, so a little bit of a good insurance policy with Johnson. We'll talk about him, I'm sure, as we go through this in any number of ways. But on defense, they're very shorthanded on the defensive line right now, specifically the interior defensive line. They finished the game with only 2 healthy players. 0 pressures from that group in the last 31 snaps, which is largely a function of them playing too many snaps. Matabike finished playing 42 of the last 44, and the Ravens just don't do that in terms of abusing their players. Broderick Washington was the other one who played a lot of snaps, and even Travis Jones, who was completely hobbled, played a few. They signed Josh Tupou. I don't think that's enough. They're going to need another interior defensive lineman from somewhere, or somebody's going to have to get healthy. And then, of course, at safety, they're extremely shorthanded. They've got a situation that I don't think we fully understand in terms of what's going on with Marcus Williams, and Eddie Jackson obviously had a fairly disastrous game.
Yeah, and I think wide receiver, you could definitely argue it was a need, but not in the way that some of these defensive needs are, where obviously you're pretty set with Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman and what they have done this season. But the depth outside of those guys was always a little bit iffy in terms of, do you trust Nelson Aguilar in a bigger role? Do you trust Tylan Wallace? You know, it doesn't seem like Tez Walker is in the plans right now. And so for Diontae Johnson, comes in after a bunch of years in Pittsburgh and half the year in Carolina. Essentially, Ken, it was a free acquisition. The Ravens moving down, about, in the grand scheme of things, 10, 20 spots for Diontae Johnson. It was Diontae and a 6th for a 5th round pick. So the Ravens still have 11 draft picks in their arsenal as it stands today. So still some ammunition for a potential other move, or maybe even a couple, depending on what they want here. Comes in as a guy that's a good route runner. Can certainly take some pressure off of the Ravens in a couple of different situations. Don't want to use him as the full-time number 1 guy. He's not that. And again, even number 2, Rashad Bateman should be fully entrenched there. To you, though, is this a move that moves a needle for you? Is this a move that you're more so could play in certain spots? What's kind of your overall thought on what Diontae Johnson can potentially bring to Baltimore?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a few positives that he brings. By the way, the move is not completely free because they are picking up one more contract. There's no rule of 51 this time of year. So it's $625,000 of cap. It's not quite zero, but there have been years where the Ravens are fighting over those last few $100,000 of cap. Right. So it's almost free. And with it, they get a return man who should be a pretty decent upgrade. And it may say something about Deontay Hardy's health that we don't know, that he just will not be back. I think if Johnson were to play well, Hardy's probably going to spend the rest of the year on IR anyway, from what's going on. They have possibility to use him on gadget plays. I think that's a tremendous potential use. We talked about this a little bit on my show, but Zay Flowers had an ADOT of 17.3 in this last game, which is terrific. That's really using him down the field. It's forcing the safety to react to him being out there, which it creates all kinds of opportunity for other players. When you're only using Zay as a horizontal threat, you don't get the same value. And I think if a player like Diontae Johnson can give you some of that, that's a real big value. And obviously the biggest probably single thing you get above those two, is the insurance policy you get in case there's an injury to either Flowers or Bateman. Wide receivers get hurt, they miss time. You got to have somebody in the bullpen ready to go, and Diontae Johnson is a decent backup.
Yeah, I think as a depth option, it's a great move. As a wide receiver 3, because I think you wanted someone who wasn't going to necessarily eat into Rashad Bateman snaps, but could still be good enough to be a solid depth piece that you feel a little better than Nelson Aguilar trotting out there for any percentage number of snaps. And that's not like Nelson has been playing poorly or anything. Obviously, had a decently up and down game, I would say, against the Browns, caught the touchdown, but then had the big drop. But I think you just trust Diontae a little more than you trust Nelson Aguilar, plus his ability, as you mentioned, on those gadget plays. But Ken, I know that a lot of receiver moves have been made over the course of the last couple of weeks. Obviously, Devontae Adams headlining that whole situation, but you have Amari Cooper going to Buffalo, DeAndre Hopkins now in Kansas City. We've heard people kind of try to compare a lot of these moves to each other, particularly Colin Cowherd and Jason McIntyre had to say, like, oh, Amari Cooper, DeAndre Hopkins, Diontae Johnson, all like B+ level receivers. Is Diontae Johnson, in your mind, up to that level of an Amari Cooper or DeAndre Hopkins? Or do you think this is more, it kind of fits what the Ravens needed, but it's not that like Amari or DeAndre type?
Right. So Devontae Adams is probably the best of the 3. Cooper is a step down, and then Diontae Johnson is a step down still. Diontae Johnson, not a high yards per target guy career. A lot of excuses can be made. He had 6.2 yards per target this year. It's with a horrific set of quarterbacks in Carolina. He had 6.8 yards per target career. It's a lot of targets. It's not good. Did he get some bad marginal targets? Probably. I don't really believe that happened in Pittsburgh as much as it happened so far this year in Carolina. But I can't make that be a good number is basically what I'm coming back to. And he's a guy who, hopefully can give the Ravens some value in some specific ways and provide insurance policy, but he's not Cooper or Adams.
Yeah. And even, for a DeAndre Hopkins type guy in Kansas City, I mean, I think for Diontae Johnson, one of the things that I'm at least a little encouraged by is the fact that we've mentioned, I know we talked about it, Ken, quarterback play for Diontae. Pittsburgh, it was old Ben Roethlisberger, Kenny Pickett. Obviously in Carolina, that's just an absolute disaster right now with Bryce Young and Andy Dalton. So playing with that and then going and playing with Lamar Jackson should be quite the upgrade. But you don't want to necessarily put Diontae Johnson in spots where it takes away from, 1, your other players, but 2, your sets that have gotten you this far. Because Diontae Johnson is not a blocker. You're not going to put him out there in blocking situations. I know a lot's been made of the drops. That has kind of toned down over the past couple of seasons for him. I think a lot of people just kind of live in the past with that a little bit. But to me, it's a low risk. I don't want to say like high reward move, but it's decent-ish reward if everything works out for them. But it's not a move to me that is a needle mover. Okay, the Ravens are going to the Super Bowl now because they have Diontae Johnson on their roster. Now, some people right now with the move say, okay, well, now Baltimore's a prime AFC favorite. And again, that was some of the talking points on with Colin Cowherd and a bunch of other people where it's like, all right, well, Kansas City is number 1, but then you have Baltimore and Buffalo is kind of a toss-up for number 2. And I'm saying, well, didn't we just see what happened in week 4? Now, Buffalo, they have Amari Cooper. They didn't have some of their defensive stars. Baltimore obviously didn't have guys as well. But how do you kind of stack up Baltimore in the AFC right now, Ken? Because there are a lot of different teams that are making a push. And obviously right now, Baltimore's not even at the top of their own division.
Right. That's the first consideration is the Ravens have to win this division. They need to figure out how to get past the Steelers a minimum of once. It might take 2 wins against the Steelers to get it done. Probably will, if I had to guess. Losing the game to the Browns means they're at a divisional disadvantage. So they've got to figure out how to beat the Steelers. And that hasn't been something they've been able to do in recent years. They match up pretty well against who the Ravens are. We saw, there's some similarity to the pass rush they bring to what the Browns bring in terms of having powerful guys on the edge. Not an ideal circumstance for them. So assuming they can get to that point, and I would have put them as a very strong favorite, 75% or so to win the division going into this week. Now it's lower. That's the first thing they need to secure. And then they worry about the seeding after that goes out. Obviously, the big prize is the 1 seed. The second biggest prize is a very big difference from 3 is the 2 seed. If you get the 2 seed, you play 2 consecutive home games one in the wild card round, against either the 3 or the 3, 4, or 5, one of those 3 in the second game. And you really want that. I mean, that's the ideal situation to be in if you're not going to be the one. I think at this point, it's probably too late to get the one with 3 losses and the head-to-head loss to the Chiefs. But it's not too late to catch up a game on Buffalo, and having the head-to-head on them would do it. And they still have a chance to win a game against Houston and be the 2 seed that way too. If they get back to that point, if the secondary heals up and they basically have Humphrey and Wiggins back, I think that will be good enough. They need to find a safety, and they need to make sure they can get back up to 5 defensive linemen. Right now, that's just an enormous problem that is the thing that's keeping me up right now at night.
Yeah, and I think, again, Kansas City is effectively, as you mentioned, Ken, up 4 games on the Ravens right now with the 3 losses plus the head-to-head tiebreaker. And we are 8 weeks into the season, so that is a tough climb. Not impossible, but certainly they have their work cut out for them if they want to get back to that point. I think Baltimore is a top AFC contender, but again, when we're talking about needle moving, if we're talking about Baltimore as a top AFC contender because of Diontae Johnson, that to me is a little bit like I'm not saying because of Diontae Johnson I'm saying because of the talent they have and what they could possibly add on the defensive side of the ball. But as you talked about, there are plenty of holes that have to be addressed there and plenty of other problems. I know we talked about this on your show that, who knows if they're even going to be solved by the time the season is over, because some of them are just so deeply rooted down in that defense. So coming up in the second part of the show, we'll talk a little bit more about Diontae Johnson, also how the Ravens can fix this defense, whether by trade or just by getting better internally. So be sure to stay tuned. We have lots to get to here on this episode of Locked On Ravens. First, this show is sponsored by Bilt. Listen up, renters. We've all been there, feeling like you might be stuck in a loop of rent payments, feeling like we're burning cash with those rent checks. It's frustrating, right? But here's the deal. Bilt Rewards has figured out a way to make rent more rewarding. Say goodbye to the money. Bonfire and hello to a renter's revolution with Bilt. Bilt is breaking ground as a neighborhood rewards program that hooks you up with points on your rent. Every month, pay your rent and watch the Bilt points roll in. Use points to jet off on a dream vacation. Put your points towards a flight or a hotel stay with 500 plus airlines and 700,000 plus hotels and properties. You can also use your points to book fitness studio classes. Redeem them towards a future rent payment. They're designed to meet your lifestyle. Pay rent hassle-free through the Bilt Rewards app. Your rent game just got a major upgrade. Bilt points have been consistently ranked the highest value point currency by the Points Guy and Bank Rate. Earn points by paying rent right now when you go to joinbilt.com/LockedOnNFL. That's joinbilt.com/LockedOnNFL. Make sure to use our URL so they know we sent you. Joinbilt.com/LockedOnNFL to start earning points with your rent payments today. We are back, our second segment, Locked On Ravens with Ken McKusick. I am Kevin Ostreicher, still here on this Wednesday. Appreciate everybody again for tuning in to the show. Be sure to tell a friend, tell a family member about our show here. We bring you 5 days a week plus of daily Ravens coverage. Now, Ken, with Diontae Johnson in the fold, I think for me personally, I would have loved it if the Ravens would have gotten a bigger bodied player, someone who had that type of a frame. Diontae 5'10", and while they have Rashad Bateman, who, again, I don't know if we ever clarified if he was 6 foot or 6'1", but he's somewhere in that range. They're not using Tez Walker right now. I don't think they necessarily have a ton of belief in him at this point. I don't necessarily know who else it would have been, but with DeAndre Hopkins off the board, Amari Cooper off the board, we talked about that. Was Diontae even on your radar for the Ravens, or did this come as a shock to you?
It's a bit of a surprise because I don't think it really directly addresses their needs. So it was nice to get the insurance policy. I think that's where the real value is. If I'm going to put 10 points of value into this trade that the Ravens got, and I'd say 1 is in his value as a return man in upgrading that, maybe even two I'll put in there. And then 1 or 2 again is in a gadget player, maybe 2. Then I'd say 6 is in his value as an insurance policy. So it's mostly that, hey, Flowers or Bateman is likely to get hurt. I've seen some things out there today talking about Bateman being a bust. People need to not live 5 years ago or 2 years ago with receivers. Bateman is 5th in the entire NFL in yards per target right now. He's having a great year. And, you and I talked about what a great contract this is now for the Ravens. It's a valuable thing. If they were to trade Rashad Bateman, as one listener was suggesting, does this provide an opportunity to trade him? I mean, it'd be pretty close as to whether they get a first-round pick for Rashad Bateman. He's worth more than Adams because Adams is a rental for half a season. Bateman, you have 3 years at a very, ridiculously cheap rate. If you're looking at who's the other guy who got traded, Cooper, he's worth a lot more than that as well. So I think you could certainly make the argument that Rashad Bateman would draw a number one pick if they traded him at this point.
And again, I'm calling that the best contract in football, or at least one of them, because of everything that goes into that. And especially with the market, like the market wide receivers are, and it just continues to go up and up and up. And so obviously the 5th year snafu cost Bateman some money there, but the Ravens benefited off of that. And look, we can admit that his game on Sunday against Cleveland wasn't great. He had a couple big drops, including the big 50-yard one off his face mask. But overall, the fact that he has been able to establish this connection with Lamar, you never wanted, again, to get a guy that was going to eat directly into those snaps in a huge way. I'm sure Diontae will take a couple of them. But if we start getting into decent territory with that, that's not good, because I think, to me, Bateman provides so much value, at least he has this season, and you want to give him more opportunities to be able to go out there and prove that on a weekly basis and not have a guy in Diontae Johnson who gives you opportunities to do some different stuff, but not at the rate of going away from what got you there.
Right. 200 snaps, 225 snaps. You get 25 snaps a game. I'm happy with the thing. If he gets 40 snaps a game, it's probably because somebody got hurt. And, and it won't be a good thing for the Ravens. The other reason he might get more snaps is because they play a lot more 11 personnel. That's also probably not a good thing game script wise for the Ravens. Everybody says, well, the whole league's playing 11 personnel. Why wouldn't they? Well, they wouldn't, because they've got Derrick Henry and they've got, a tight end room that's extremely strong. And that's a heavy competition for snaps with that wide receiver group. And frankly, the combination of Ricard and the tight ends gives you a lot more than Diontae Johnson has this year or any other year in his career. So you'd prefer to have those guys on the field if you looked at it logically, I think. So it's going to be hard for him to get on the field. And when he does, hopefully makes the most of the opportunities, and hopefully he can help the Ravens in some specific ways.
Yeah, the Ravens spread the ball around more, but again, I'm not necessarily looking at that and saying, well, we got to have 3 receivers on the field, or just, go empty with all this stuff and make sure that he gets snaps. Yes, you're going to use him in opportunities and situations that benefit him, but that's going to be the key, is not like forcing him on the field because you traded for him. And the Ravens do a decently good job at that anyway. I'm not saying they don't do that or don't do a good job at that. But to me, if you start getting away from your tight end room and you start going lighter, I think that takes away some of the allure of some of those heavier packages and some of the threat that you have with Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson on the field together, because it reminds me, what was it? When they would run, I think it was 2018, maybe it was I think it was 2018. Maybe I'm wrong. But they would run specifically to Nick Boyle's side of the field when Mark Andrews was in there, and it was a tell. It was a tell when Mark was in there. And it was heavy sets, because they would run to Nick Boyle's side of the field and teams just stacked up that side. Maybe it was 2020. I can't even remember when it was, but they did that. And so you don't want to have it. Part of the thing that makes this Ravens offense so good, Ken, is the fact that they don't have a lot of tells out there, because of the fact that they can do so many things. Diontae being out there is probably going to mean they're throwing the ball. So
it could mean that. I mean, they do want to run some out of 11, I'm sure, but sure. I agree. It probably means it gives them a sustained element of misdirection. It gives them an opportunity to get a guy underneath. Diontae Johnson could be a choice route guy for them as well, or they could create choice routes off the fact that Flowers is running deep more often and creating space underneath. They just have it gives them a few more options when they're in 11 personnel. It's actually a fairly specific subset of what the Ravens actually do. So I really wouldn't look for him to play a ton. He'll play some. If he plays a lot, it means somebody else is hurt.
Yep. And this is, again, a contract year for Diontae Johnson, so he'll be a free agent after the season. And as you mentioned, Ken, Baltimore picking up about 600,000 plus of that. I think 625 is the exact number on that, as you mentioned. So Carolina picking up over $3 million of that to facilitate this and make it all go. So that's good for the Ravens. And I also think when you talk about him as a gadget player, I kind of want to revisit that for a second, because I know we had a good conversation about it on your show, is with Zay, he can be a gadget guy for you if you want, but he provides so much more value, and I'll use the word gravity with him if he is out there not being the quote unquote decoy or quote unquote gadget player when that is the case, because he has a couple of different options with the way that he runs his routes, particularly with his fluidity. And I know you mentioned the word suddenness with him, Ken. I like that word a lot because it is what he is. He's a sudden route runner. When you can use Zay in that way and have someone else be the guy that you have to kind of follow, and Zay can kind of leak out, I think that will help this offense tremendously because of the way that Zay operates and just how dangerous he is in so many different aspects.
Yeah, I think he commands that kind of respect. Travis Jones on defense would be the similar guy who really drives the Ravens pass rush by being that internal commander of double team. Pernell McPhee, Trevor Price in past years, Sam Adams going all the way back to 2000, all had that kind of a mark about them. Even though there's other guys picking up the sacks from the outside, they're the guys who are oftentimes running the whole thing. One of the things, there is a little bit of overlap in gadgetry. We hope from the return of Keaton Mitchell, which we're now only 3 weeks away from. He'll probably return for the Pittsburgh game. And he's a guy who will probably take snaps away from Diontae Johnson because he's got to get on the field somehow, I would figure. He'll probably be a return man also. Maybe the two of them are back there on kickoffs returning, and Diontae Johnson becomes the Ravens punt return guy, I would think, for the rest of the year. So lots of different ways in which they can be used, but they are also going to compete for snaps a little bit.
Right. And we know that Baltimore special teams was a big factor in the game on Sunday. Obviously, John Harbaugh not happy with that group whatsoever, made that very clear during his Monday press conference. And part of that was Chris Collier not really having a great game, is the returner taking stuff out of the end zone he shouldn't have, and miscommunications and all that. So might be a very different looking return game for this Ravens team, and that sneaky underrated need of returner. Diontae Johnson certainly can fill that for them in multiple different roles. So again, I'm not expecting Diontae Johnson to come in here and just, put up 50 catches for 600 yards and 4 touchdowns, but they can use them in certain spots. And that to me is a low risk, medium reward type of move for the Ravens in this one. But just because they acquired Diontae Johnson doesn't mean that they should be done. Coming up in this final part of the show, we'll be diving into what the Ravens could do defensively and what their outlook could be if they don't make a move there. So be sure to stay tuned. A lot to get to on Locked On Ravens. First, the show is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So if you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. We're going to start with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. We are back, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with Ken McKusick talking Ravens football. Ravens at 5-3 right now after a tough loss to the Cleveland Browns in week number 8. Ken, I know a lot of people were generally, I saw a lot of excitement for the move, but I also saw some dissatisfaction because of the fact that Diontae Johnson cannot rush the passer. He's not going to go out there and cover wide receivers. He's not a defensive player. And we know that defense has been the issue for the Ravens this season, particularly obviously in the secondary, and obviously now pass rush is becoming more and more of an issue each week. So obviously Baltimore's been linked to a bunch of different names, and there are a bunch of guys out there that could potentially be options for them, including, an Azeez Ojulari, former Ravens, like Darius Smith, Jadeveon Clowney, possibly Calais Campbell on the interior. In the secondary, you have options like potentially Javon Holland or others that could make sense. In your mind, do you think Baltimore should make a move for an edge rusher, a secondary member? Or do you think they should try to get both of them in some way, shape, or form on the roster?
Interior defensive line, safety, edge would be third on the defense. Maybe corner even would be third. I'm not sure edge even fits in there. The marginal gain at edge is fairly small. We talked a little bit about this on my show, but whoever you're bringing in, you have to subtract somebody. They currently have 7 guys. If they pick up an 8th, they really are in a position where they have to get rid of people. Maybe that David Ojabo gets traded if you trade for an edge, and if you can get a substantial amount of the if you can avoid sending draft capital out because of that, and you get a pretty good edge out of it, then I'd be fine with that. I've mentioned the possibility of trading Ajabo directly head up for Clowney right now, and that'd be Clowney at the vet minimum. Ajabo, obviously, that contract goes away. It's almost a wash in terms of salary, probably a little bit more on the Clowney side, but not much. And then I think you get more productivity for half a year out of Clowney than you get in a year and a half out of Ajabo. So I'd be in favor of that kind of thing. But that's not the needle moving change, because their marginal gain in terms of what edge rushers they have now, who are good enough to be fourth in the National Football League in sacks, is not that much. Now, what's driven that in large part has been the interior pass rush being good, and losing Pierce and Travis Jones now. They've either got to get those guys healthy or find somebody else from the inside. Calais Campbell is a name, very cheap, that fits their needs pretty directly. I'd be excited about that move, much more so than an edge rusher, much more so, a whole nother stratosphere. And I'd be more excited too to get a safety who does not have to be particularly expensive. But if they do want to go expensive at safety, that's the one position I'm actually okay with it, because I don't think either Williams or Jackson will be here in 2025. And so if they don't address free safety by means of a pickup now, then they have to address it in the draft. And that is a high value skill set to have a rangy center fielder free safety.
Yeah. And I think interior wise, Travis Jones is somebody that clearly is not healthy right now whatsoever. Right. He's not Travis Jones right now because of that ankle. And I mean, the Ravens bye doesn't come until very late in the season. So, I mean, he's not really providing you much right now. He played less than 20 snaps last week and really didn't show much of anything. Plus, you're down Michael Pierce and Brent Urban right now. You have to get something there, because part of what made the Ravens defense so good last year, particularly with a guy like Nnamdi Madubuike and others, is that they were able to win quickly on the interior, which just made everything else go. And we just haven't seen that from a guy like Travis Jones while he's been injured, right? Earlier in the season, we saw it. He was winning. Right. He was pushing guys over, but it's just taken away so much of his mobility and ability that at this point, you might just have to sit him until he's healthy and kind of lose him on your interior, because at this point, I mean, he's not really giving you much.
Right. And that's what I'm afraid of. And you know, they got Josh Tupou, who is just a placeholder. He's a snap count guy who will go in there and play the nose and hopefully not hurt you too badly, but he's not going to give anything to your pass rush. And all he's going to do basically is allow some additional rest for some other players there. And he will not be enough. So if they can't go into this next game with just the three of guys, the two who finished healthy plus Tupou, they have to make another move. I mean, they have to make another move by next week. The other possibility is bringing up like a Chris Wormley from the practice squad, which would still only be 4 and is not sufficient. But you know, they somewhere they've got to go out and figure out how to get that 5th interior defensive lineman, or this injury to Pierce has to be much less severe than it appears it may be. So just the way he hobbled off the field, and you know, being a big man who's had some leg injuries in the past, I'm not entirely optimistic about what's going on.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything up to this point, but Pierce, as you mentioned, does have an injury history, and he'd be a big loss, a huge loss, literally and figuratively, for this defensive line. But going a little bit more into the Cleveland game, Ken, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, Zach Orr and everything, because I know, look, he's not out there dropping interceptions and blowing coverages and this, that, and the other. But I think a lot of people, I guess the word I would use for the Baltimore fan base is restless with Zach Orr in kind of the stuff that we've seen him do this season. I think everybody knew it wasn't going to be sunshine and rainbows. There was going to be an adjustment period, especially with the gauntlet the Ravens had to open up their season with all those star quarterbacks and guys they had to play. But in your mind, do you think Zach Orr has done an adequate job here? Do you think that some of the defensive faults are more on his plate, or do you think it's some of the talent not living up to expectations, such as a Marcus Williams?
Share of division of blame there to be had for certain, because the talent did not live up to it. Marcus Williams, whatever is going on, personnel to him is not good. They need to get him on the field. One point we made on my show was that they should probably have him in on special teams if he's going to be out of the active roster. The big thing I have with Orr is about how quickly he adapts to a problem. And early in the season, Didn't really see him do it in week 1 to the way the Chiefs were beating with bunch formation play after play. Week 2, Devontae Adams and the tight end, the rookie tight end, Brock Bowers, beat him like a drum, and they couldn't figure out how to double team those guys or do whatever was necessary to make them be an unattractive target to Gardner Minshew in that game. So that didn't work out. Then week 3 came along, and either by higher level decision or by Orr himself, they decided to go to the dime defense, and that was much more effective. They rode that throughout the 5-game winning streak, and played as much dime as any Ravens team has in the team's history, which is a great place to be, by the way, if you can effectively do that. It was a good solution to the middle of the field being weak, although it did not completely make up for the fact that the safeties on the back end weren't doing well. But that was a step in the right direction for those 5 games, and it was a reason why they were able to contribute to those wins. This last week, I'll say I did notice one other adaptation that Orr made that I thought was good, and it came in the last series of the game where the Ravens really went all out to get after the quarterback. And I know there's some people who didn't like that. I absolutely loved it in terms of you want exactly a high risk, high reward play at that time when they're right on the verge of field goal range. They were 53 yards, 55 yards, whatever they were on the kick. And then for the last 7 plays defensively, they rushed 5-0 with a blitz and a stunt and gave up ATS. So that's a deceptive pass rush for me. The next time they rushed 5-2, I mean, they dropped 2. So it's a simulated pressure with a double blitz. So I love that one too. It went for 11 yards, but that's life with ample time and space. Another 5-2, another blitz on the next play with a ball out quickly, went for 3 yards. Incomplete pass with a pressure by 0 on a 6-man rush. That was good. Then they gave up the 7-yard play, which was really unfortunate. Quarterback hit by Tavius Robinson. They got the ball out to the right. I think it was Washington was in coverage there. Just got the first down. Frustrating as hell because it was 3rd and 7. It was a good chance to force them into a very bad decision on 4th down or a bit of long field goal or whatever. So that would have been a great choice. But that was a 6-1 pass rush. Then they had the penalty. Then they ran out a 6-man pass rush again. Balls out quickly with a blitz, by the way, and interception gets dropped. They failed to seal the ball game there. And then they ran the first 7-man pass rush of the entire game on the next play with a double blitz from 0 and 29. So they greased up everything they had, knowing how little pressure they were getting. So Orr adapted to what was going on. It was exactly the right call. It's completely the right call to do so. And it just didn't work out. Obviously, Winston beat Jackson pretty easily for that 38-yard touchdown, which really was a function of them getting that play blocked up. I've seen some comments about flat-footedness of Jackson and whatnot, but there was no way he was going to cover that play. So that's not on Orr in any sense. I thought Orr did the right thing to try and go for it. In fact, Orr's risk-taking actually gave the chance for 59 seconds of Lamar Jackson magic to occur.
Yeah.
So I thought Orr in particular for that particular stretch of plays adapted very well. And I think his hands were largely tied by the organizational decision with regard to Williams and the injuries that happened on the defensive line and how much that hampered the team.
Right. The thing that I kind of took away was, on those blitzes, particularly on the last play where Tillman got the touchdown, it was, well, they're either going to knock him further back or you're going to give up a touchdown and give your offense a shot to be able to win the game, which essentially is what everybody wanted in the first place, which was don't let the game come down to your defense. Let the game come down to your offense. Unfortunately, the Ravens can't get it done at the end of the game, but I would have much rather had the ball in Lamar Jackson's hands there with a shot as opposed to seeing the defense get walked down again. And, I think everybody knew it was coming if that was the case. So,
I mean, another way to think of it is a 20-yard completion in that case would have been a hell of a lot worse than a 38-yard touchdown because it would have created a chip shot field goal situation and a kneel kick.
Right. Essentially, Tillman just goes down and you kneel out the clock and you get your kicker in position. You kick the game-winning field goal. At least Baltimore had a shot with the way that things played out there. But speaking of the offense, Ken, I know everybody's talking about the drops from the receivers, which, certainly is a big factor with Rashad Bateman having a couple, Nelson Aguilar having one. But the Browns' defensive line gave Baltimore's offensive line fits for the majority of this game. A lot of quick wins from the Browns. Myles Garrett, Zadarius Smith, Okoronkwo in there as well. You got Shelby Harris, Mike Hall, a bunch of guys who were able to beat up on the Ravens' offensive line. not every offensive lineman performed poorly, but I think they were a couple of very loud, poor performances, particularly, unfortunately, by Ronnie Stanley. Daniel Faalele did not have a great game. What was your overall assessment of what the offensive line showed on Sunday?
So at a high level, they had a lot of trouble with the outside rushers. I think more than that, it forced them into some compromises in terms of set and chip blocks where they overblocked with eligible receivers at the line of scrimmage to try and prevent the pass rush. And that hurt them some additionally. Because Jackson had 3.5 seconds to throw in this. By the way, Lamar Jackson had the second most amount of time to throw in the whole National Football League. The only guy who had more was Winston on the other side, which is terrible. Winston had over 4 seconds to throw on average in this game. So it was ugly. But in Jackson's case, it was a matter of avoiding pressure. Miraculously, just getting out of some pressure situations that you wouldn't think were possible. Stanley allowed more hands on the quarterback kind of pressure than he does normally. He's normally a slow death bump pressure guy that's a type of pressure that Lamar works extremely well with. McCary's the only one who really had a good game. I know you don't want to go through all the scores here, so I point people out to my article or the podcast we did to look at the actual scores. Linderbaum had kind of a tough game. He had a holding penalty. We had Faalele have a very tough game, a lot of pressures. A D still for him, and then Rosengart a solid C game. And again, the way I would characterize that is if you could sign up for that for the rest of the season right now, I'd probably do it.
Yeah. I think they've gotten great stuff from Rosengart, all the circumstances considered, being a rookie. And obviously Stanley, outside of this game, has played very well. He's bounced back in a big way. And I do think part of this is, Lamar Jackson does mask some things with offensive linemen. But at the end of the day, these guys are performing well in spots. But this was a game that the offensive line definitely had probably one of their worst, if not the worst game of the season here. But I want to leave you with this, a question for you about the team where, Baltimore, we know the defensive issues are a lot. Offensively, we can talk about some of the cute play calling from Todd Monken, this, that, and the other. But when you look at Baltimore's glaring issues, like the deep-rooted stuff that has to have either a big acquisition or something else needs to come in or happen to make that go away. If that doesn't happen and they only make, let's say, another marginal trade or a smaller move, are Baltimore's issues, particularly defensively, too deep-rooted to win a Super Bowl this season if not enough is made of them? Or do you think that they still have a shot to do
it? I think, they're down to get into the tournament and take your lottery pick at that point. And it might not even be as a division winner if they can't address the defensive issues in any way at all. I think they have to try. And I'm fine with a small ball kind of move. If their only move was to acquire Marcus May to play safety the rest of the year on the back end, that would be enough for me. I do want an interior defensive lineman, but I assume that's going to happen in the natural course of business, that I don't have to ask for it. But somehow they need to get healthier than they are right now at those two positions. I'm not in favor at all of going out and making a titanic move for an edge rusher on a year like that where these other problems exist. I'm just not in favor of it. I don't think they have a good enough chance to win the Super Bowl. I don't think it moves the needle enough for them to do it, but particularly with the presence of other defensive problems, which are so great.
Yeah, definitely moves are needed, or just change is needed some way, shape, or form there. So we got less than a week to go now until the trade deadline. The Ravens have addressed their offensive need, even though it was not their biggest one by far. So no more offensive moves. If they do another one, I'm not really going to be sure what to think about that. Defensive only for this Ravens team, and hopefully they can do something by the time the trade deadline rolls around. Ken, appreciate you for hopping on as always. Please tell people where they can find you and what you're working on.
Sure. I'll give you the normal schedule because I do 9 pods a week. I probably, like Kevin, probably the two of the big content creators locally. But you have two defensive pods drop Tuesday, 2 offensive pods drop Wednesday. On Thursdays, usually Know Your Foe and another pod called One Last Thing, which usually handles some particular element with a very clever guy, Slava Cooperstein. Then we have Friday Morning GM, which shows up, and then 2 shows for matchups, one for offense, one for defense with Frazier Tafar.
Man, Ken is one of the hardest workers in this Baltimore Ravens podcast business. Links will be in the description down below for all of Ken's work, so be sure to check him out over there. And, of course, also follow him on Twitter at Film Study Ravens and get everything that Ken is working on. So, Ken, appreciate you. As always, thank you for hopping on, and thank you to everybody for listening to today's episode of Locked On Ravens. Again, be sure to like and subscribe here on YouTube on the way out, and on the way out in audio form, be sure to follow along and subscribe as well. Coming up tomorrow, of course, it's more Ravens content as we move away from the Browns. Week 8 loss for Baltimore and more so into Week 9 against the Denver Broncos. So be sure to stay tuned. Got a lot coming up. We'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.